Alistair Croft existed in a world of ghosts, not the spectral kind, but the ghosts of data, the digital footprints, the purchasing habits, the online whispers of millions of people he would never meet. As the CEO of Apex Analytics, he was a master of prediction. His company's crowning achievement, an AI named Project Chimera, could forecast market trends with terrifying accuracy. It was a machine that turned human desire into profit, and it had made him a billionaire. But the man who could predict the future of a global market couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation that wasn't about data points or profit margins. His office, a sterile expanse of glass and chrome on the 90th floor, was his sanctuary and his prison. He worked late, long after the city's lights had transformed into a glittering tapestry below. It was on one such night, amidst the quiet hum of servers, that his meticulously ordered world was first disturbed. The sound was almost imperceptible, the soft, rhythmic squeak of a cleaning cart's wheel. He looked up from his monitor, annoyed by the intrusion. A woman was polishing the glass wall of his office. She was part of the night crew, one of the invisible army that descended after hours to erase the day's smudges and restore the building to its pristine state. He had never noticed her before. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her movements economical and graceful. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard-issue gray uniform. She didn't look at him, her focus entirely on her work. As Alistair turned back to his screen, his hand brushed against a small, silver frame on his desk, knocking it to the floor. The glass shattered. The woman flinched at the sound. She turned, her work forgotten, and hurried over. "Are you all right, sir?" Alistair stared at the broken frame, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Lying on the floor amidst the shards of glass was a small, worn photograph, a faded image of a woman with a kind, radiant smile. It was the only personal item in his entire office. "I'm fine," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Just leave it." But she didn't leave. She knelt carefully, picking up the larger pieces of glass with a practiced hand. Then she gently picked up the photograph. She held it for a moment, her gaze soft with a reverence that felt deeply out of place in the cold, corporate environment. She placed it carefully on his desk, away from the mess. "She has a beautiful smile," the woman said softly, her voice the first gentle sound he had heard all day. Alistair didn't respond. He watched as she retrieved a small dustpan and brush from her cart and meticulously swept up every last shard of glass. She worked in silence, her presence a quiet counterpoint to the storm of irritation and old grief brewing inside him. When she was done, she stood and looked at him, not with the deference or fear he was used to, but with a simple, human empathy. "I'm sorry about your picture," she said. Then she turned and continued her work, her cart's wheel resuming its soft, rhythmic squeak as she disappeared down the hall. Alistair remained frozen, staring at the photograph on his desk. No one had ever mentioned the picture before. His executives and assistants had learned to treat it as part of the landscape, an object without a story. But this cleaner, this invisible woman, had seen not just an object, but a person. And in her quiet, simple words, she had breached a wall around his heart he hadn't even known was still standing. He didn't know her name, but he knew he would not forget her face. For the first time in years, Alistair stayed late at the office, not to work, but to wait. He sat in the shadows of his office, the main lights off, watching the hallway. He told himself it was an anomaly, a variable he needed to understand. Why had a stranger's simple act of kindness unsettled him so profoundly? Just after midnight, her cart squeaked into view. He watched her work, her movements methodical and unhurried. He saw her pause to straighten a crooked painting in the hall,
a small act of care no one would ever notice. He saw her find a wallet left behind by a junior executive, and instead of leaving it for the morning, she took the time to look up the owner's desk and place it securely on his chair. Finally, he stepped out of his office. "Excuse me." She turned, her expression calm, though a flicker of surprise registered in her dark eyes. It was the cleaner from the night before. "I never got your name," he said. "It's Isla," she replied, her voice steady. "Isla," he repeated. The name felt solid, real. He gestured back toward his office. "I wanted to thank you for last night. It was thoughtful." "I was just doing my job," she said, though a faint warmth entered her cheeks. "No," he countered. "Your job is to clean. You showed compassion. There's a difference." An unusual silence stretched between them, the hum of the building's HVAC system filling the void. He was used to commanding conversations, to having people hang on his every word. But with Isla, the usual power dynamics felt irrelevant. "You see a lot from down here, don't you?" he asked, an impulsive question. She considered it for a moment. "I see the things people leave behind. Coffee cups with lipstick stains, crumpled notes, pictures of their kids taped to their monitors. You learn more about people from their trash than from their presentations." The observation was so astute, so data-driven in a human way, that it caught him off guard. He had spent a fortune on Project Chimera to understand people, and she was doing it just with her eyes. "What do you see when you look at my office?" he asked, testing her. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I see a man who is very successful and very alone." Her words were not a judgment, but a simple statement of fact. And they were true. The truth of it echoed in the vast emptiness of his life. From that night on, their strange, quiet conversations became a ritual. He would stay late, and she would take her break outside his office. He learned about her life in small, carefully offered fragments. She was putting her younger brother through college, working 2 jobs to pay for his tuition and living expenses. She dreamed of one day owning a small bookstore, a quiet place filled with stories. He, in turn, found himself speaking of things he had never articulated. He told her about the woman in the photograph, his mother, an artist who had died when he was a teenager. She believed people were more important than profit, he admitted one night, his voice low. "I spent my whole life trying to prove her wrong." "And have you?" Isla asked gently. The question hung in the air, unanswered. He was starting to realize that in his quest to build an invincible empire, he had built a world his mother would not have recognized or admired. He was becoming the very thing he had once vowed he wouldn't be, a man who saw people as assets to be managed, not souls to be valued.
The catalyst for change came in the form of a man named Harrison Vance, Alistair's ambitious and utterly ruthless chief operating officer. Harrison was the embodiment of the new culture at Apex Analytics, a man who saw empathy as a liability and human connection as an inefficient variable. "The final data is in," Harrison announced during a board meeting, his voice sharp with triumph. "Project Chimera is ready. It has successfully analyzed all internal employee metrics. It can predict redundancies, identify underperformers, and automate workflow with 98.7% accuracy." He projected a slide onto the screen. It was a list of names. "Phase 1 will be the elimination of 20% of our administrative and support staff. That includes the entire nightly cleaning crew. They are, to be blunt, a legacy expense we can fully automate with robotics." Alistair stared at the list. He saw names he recognized from his late-night observations. He saw the security guard who always had a kind word for Isla. He saw the young man in accounting who was saving for his wedding. And he saw her division, nightly sanitation, An entire group of people reduced to a single, dismissible line item. "It will save the company $15 million annually," Harrison continued, his eyes gleaming. "A clean, efficient cut." Alistair felt a cold fury building inside him. A year ago, he would have signed off on this without a second thought. It was logical, it was efficient, it was profitable. But now, he saw faces, not numbers. He saw Isla, her quiet dignity, her hidden dreams. "We're not firing 20% of our staff," Alistair stated, his voice cutting through the room's self-congratulatory buzz. Harrison stared at him, bewildered. "Alistair, the data is unequivocal. This is the most profitable move." "I don't care what the data says," Alistair retorted, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of his board members. "These are people, not redundancies. We are not replacing them with robots." The boardroom was silent. This was a new Alistair, one they didn't recognize. Harrison's face tightened, a mask of barely concealed rage. "This is sentimental nonsense. Our shareholders expect us to maximize profit, not to run a charity. Our shareholders expect me to lead this company into the future," Alistair said, his voice like ice. "And our future will not be built on the backs of the people we discard. The discussion is over." That night, Isla found him staring out his office window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Is everything all right? You seem different tonight." He turned to her, his expression grim. "They want to fire you, Isla. All of you. They want to replace you with machines." Her face paled, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded, a sad understanding in her eyes. "I always knew this job wasn't forever. It's not going to happen," he said, his voice fierce with a protectiveness that surprised them both. "I won't let it." But Isla had underestimated Harrison. The COO was not a man who accepted defeat. He saw Alistair's sudden display of compassion as a weakness, a dangerous crack in the CEO's armor, and he began to wonder about the source of this sudden change. His attention turned to the night cleaner, the insignificant variable that had somehow corrupted the system. Harrison started watching. He saw the late-night conversations. He saw the way Alistair looked at Isla, and he began to formulate a new, far more vicious plan. If he couldn't win with data, he would win with destruction.
The attack was as brilliant as it was cruel. Harrison didn't confront Alistair directly. Instead, he used the very systems Alistair had built against him. He initiated a high-level security review, citing anomalous executive behavior, Alistair's late hours, and unauthorized fraternization with a low-level employee. It was a perfectly crafted corporate maneuver designed to paint Alistair's connection with Isla as a security risk, a sign of compromised judgment. Simultaneously, the pressure on Isla's brother intensified. His university, a recipient of a generous grant from an anonymous donor, Alistair, though she didn't know it, suddenly flagged his scholarship for review due to a clerical error. The implied threat was clear. If Isla continued to be a distraction, her brother's future would be collateral damage. Isla was terrified. She came to Alistair one night, her hands trembling, a letter from the university clutched in her hand. "I don't understand," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "They're threatening to pull his funding." Alistair looked at the letter, and he knew instantly it was Harrison's work. He was squeezing them from both sides, using corporate protocol to corner him and personal vulnerability to break her. "This is my fault, Isla," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "He's doing this to get to me through you." "Then I have to go," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't let him hurt my brother. I'll quit. I'll disappear." "No," Alistair said, his hand closing over hers. His touch was firm, grounding. "We are doing no such thing. Running is what he wants.
We are going to fight. The next day, Alistair called an emergency board meeting. Harrison walked in with a smug, confident air, holding a thick dossier. He was ready to present his case against Alistair's compromised leadership. But Alistair spoke first. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and steady, "for the past several months, I have been conducting a personal review of this company's culture. I went in search of data, but instead, I found a truth. A company's greatest asset isn't its algorithms or its market share. It's the character of its people." He looked directly at Isla, who he had asked to attend the meeting. She stood by the door, terrified but resolute. This woman, Isla Reyes, is a night cleaner. She is also the most valuable employee in this company. She has more integrity, compassion, and insight than anyone in this room. And our COO, Mr. Vance, has spent the last month trying to destroy her. He then presented his own evidence: security logs of Harrison's anonymous tips to the university, financial records showing Harrison's own history of questionable expense reports, and testimonies from other employees about his history of bullying. It was a masterful counterattack. But Harrison had one last card to play. He smirked. "This is all very touching. A billionaire falling for the help. It's a lovely story. But while you've been busy with your little pet project, you've missed the bigger picture." He tapped a command into his tablet, and the main screen lit up. It was the live feed from a rival news network. A reporter was standing in front of Apex Analytics headquarters. "We have breaking news of a hostile takeover bid for Apex Analytics," the reporter said, led by a consortium of European investors who believe the company's leadership under Alistair Croft has become dangerously unfocused and sentimental. Harrison's smile was triumphant. "You were so busy protecting your cleaner, you missed the wolves at the door. The board will have to oust you to save the company. You lose, Alistair."
A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. The board members looked from the news report to Alistair, their faces a mixture of panic and betrayal. Harrison had outmaneuvered him completely. In his focus on protecting Isla, Alistair had left his empire vulnerable. He had been so determined to prove his mother right, that people mattered more than profit. And now it seemed that very belief was about to cost him everything. He looked at Isla. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with horror and guilt. She believed this was her fault. But as Alistair looked at her, he didn't feel defeat. He felt a strange, clarifying calm. He had spent his life chasing victory, accumulating power, building walls. But the most meaningful moments of the last few months had been in the quiet conversations with Isla, in the simple act of seeing another person's soul. He had already won the only battle that truly mattered. He turned to the board, his expression unreadable. "Harrison is right about one thing. I have been unfocused. I've been so focused on our internal data, I forgot to analyze the most important data set of all, our enemies." He picked up his own tablet and swiped. The main screen changed, replacing the news report with a complex web of financial transactions. "This hostile takeover," he explained calmly, "isn't being led by a European consortium. It's being funded by a series of shell corporations, all of which trace back to a single account. An account controlled by a man who has been systematically shorting our stock for months while simultaneously feeding inside information to our competitors." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "An account controlled by our own COO, Harrison Vance." Harrison froze, the color draining from his face. "That's a lie!
That's preposterous.
Is it? Alistair countered. Project Chimera is a predictive marvel, Harrison. I just never told you I had aimed it at my own executive team. It flagged your unusual financial activities 6 weeks ago. I've been letting you build your little conspiracy, just waiting for you to expose yourself completely. The takeover bid wasn't a surprise, Harrison. It was the final piece of my evidence. Security stepped into the room. Harrison, utterly defeated, didn't resist as they escorted him out. The reign of the data-driven tyrant was over. Alistair then turned to his stunned board. There will be changes. We will no longer be a company that values data over decency. Our new mission is to build technology that serves humanity, not just the bottom line. And our first act will be the creation of the Apex Foundation, a new division dedicated to employee well-being, community outreach, and ethical innovation. He looked across the room to Isla, whose hand was pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And it will be led by the one person who has always understood our true value. Ms. Reyes, would you accept the position as president of the Apex Foundation? She couldn't speak. She just nodded, a sob of relief and disbelief escaping her. Alistair walked over to her, ignoring the still shocked board members. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek. I told you we would fight, he whispered, for her ears only. You didn't fight, she whispered back. You changed the entire world. No, he said, his gaze searching hers. You did. You changed mine.
The months that followed were a renaissance for Apex Analytics and for Alistair Croft. Guided by Isla, the new Apex Foundation became the heart of the company. They launched scholarships for underprivileged students, funded community tech labs, and created an employee support system that became the new industry standard. The company's profits didn't suffer, they soared. It turned out that a happy, valued workforce was also a brilliant and innovative one. Isla blossomed in her new role. The quiet, invisible cleaner was now a confident, compassionate leader, her innate wisdom now backed by the resources to make a real difference. She never lost her connection to the people on the floor, often leaving her new spacious office to walk the halls, talking to the janitors, the security guards, the administrative assistants. She was their voice, and they loved her for it. Alistair found a peace he had never known. He and Isla built a partnership founded on mutual respect and a shared vision. Their late-night conversations moved from the sterile office to the comfortable warmth of her small book-filled apartment, and eventually to a home they built together. One evening, a year after the boardroom showdown, they were sitting in the quiet courtyard of a new community center funded by the Apex Foundation. A group of children were learning to code on new computers inside. Do you ever miss it? Isla asked, her head resting on his shoulder. The thrill of the fight? The cold, hard numbers? Alistair looked at the worn photograph he now carried in his wallet, the one of his mother. I spent my whole life building a fortress to keep the world out, he said quietly. But all I ever really wanted was for someone to be brave enough to knock on the door. You didn't just knock, Isla. You walked in and turned all the lights on. She smiled, lacing her fingers through his. The data was always there, Alistair. You just needed to look at the right variables. He leaned in and kissed her, a simple, profound gesture of a man who was no longer alone, no longer a ghost in his own life. The boy who had vowed to prove his mother wrong had finally become a man she would have been proud of, all because he had learned to see the profound, world-changing value of a person everyone else had deemed invisible. If this story reminded you that a person's true worth is not in their title, but in their character, and that compassion is the most powerful asset of all, thank you for being with us until the end. We share stories of quiet strength, of leaders who find their way back to their hearts, and of the invisible heroes who change the world one small, decent act at a time. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their kindness matters. Leave a comment. Your words help us build a community of hope. Subscribe for more tales where decency wins and the human soul is the ultimate bottom line. No pressure, just real stories for real hearts, celebrating the quiet victories that matter most.